I'm now going to demonstrate how I make a toe on my sock. I make my toes exactly the same as my heel. I use the no-wrap method. It's called the no-wrap method, but that's not exactly true. The needles are wrapped, but the machine will be doing all the work rather than us. When we're finished with the toe, we're going to have some scrap yarn, I use crocheting cotton, left in place so that we can steam it and lock the stitches in, ready to do the Kitchener stitch. I'm not going to demonstrate the Kitchener stitch in this video, but I will on another one, so please stay tuned for that. So this is how we proceed with our toe. I'm going to make my toe on the front half of my machine. I just prefer to do it that way. Some people like to do it on the back half. That's fine, it works for them. It doesn't matter, just be sure that you're consistent. I always start the yarn carrier away from my starting position. I'm starting at the 3 o'clock position, ready to do the heel. I am using my crescent tool and I'm going to lift all of the back stitches out of work. I said stitches, but I meant needles. At this point, my yarn carrier jammed. What had happened is my needles are not quite up all the way. I go slow, I lift them up, and now they're cleared. I accidentally raised one needle too many on this side. That's not a big deal. I can lower the needle and I'll just knit it by hand. So now that needle has been worked and we're ready to proceed with the toe. You look for what side the yarn is on, and that is the first needle you're going to lift out of work. We need to engage our heel spring. And now we can proceed. I lift that needle out of work and we proceed. On this side, I lift that needle out of work and I proceed. We're going to continue the same way back and forth. I do the same thing I've done for my heels. I always put a little stitch marker on the very first needles on each side that I have raised, so I'll remember where to stop when I get going. At this point, I will now put my heel forks in place. And like my heels, I hang my second and third heel forks midway between the center and my first raised stitch. And now I'm going to proceed exactly like I did for my heel. I'm going to raise one needle on each side. If I've been talking or if I was distracted, I check, here's my working yarn, there's that first needle, the stitch is knit and the needle is raised. It's already been raised, so now I can simply proceed. I raise a needle, At this point, I'm going to stop. I do my toes exactly like my heels in that I like them slightly rounded. I have marked with yellow the last two needles on each side. I lift them together as a pair. This will give me a slightly rounded toe. And again on the last side. So now I'm ready to proceed on making the other half of my toe. At this point, I will move my heel forks up. These two needles were raised together, so I'm going to lower them together. If you lower them too much, that latch is going to close. When you lower them, leave them up just a little bit. That way the latch will remain open and you can knit that stitch without having anything fall. And again on this side, you lower both needles too far and the latch will close. Leave them up slightly so that the working yarn goes underneath. What's happening is that by doing it this way, that needle will be wrapped. The only difference is that the machine is doing the wrap for us and we don't have to pull anything out and wrap the yarn behind. It's quite brilliant how this is done. After I've done that double set, I go back to doing one needle at a time. I will now notice that once I lower this needle, I will then have left the two needles with the markers. Those were the very first needles I raised. I'm going to finish off this one stitch, this one needle I have lowered, and I'm going to stop right here. I do not want to go back and forth. I am going to continue around, and that will close any potential holes. This is how you do not get holes when you finish. I lower all of my needles very carefully. Take your time and make sure all of those latches are open. You don't want to have come this far and drop a stitch. So I am now going to knit the last row. I leave my heel spring on so that I have a nice snug tension all the way around my toe. Now I am going to take little safety pins. I have these little hook safety pins. You could use a regular safety pin if you like. And now I'm going to mark the corners. This is going to make it much easier for me to Kitchener my toe. This is my starting position. I'm going to take this, I'll get a silver one so you can see a little bit better. There we have it. There's my safety pin. And I'm going to put it in the bars at that point. This is going to make it easy for me to identify the start and the stop for Kitchenering my toe. As you can see, this is where my toe has been made, and this is where I stopped. I put the pin in place to clearly mark my stopping point. This is going to be very helpful when I go to Kitchener the toe closed. And the same on the other side. I put a safety pin and I did it through 2 bars. Now that I have my safety pins in place, I'm going to knit 1 additional row. And I will stop at 3 o'clock, which was my starting position. That additional row is going to give me all of the yarn I need in order to Kitchener my toe closed. I will now take my yarn and give it a little snip. I give it about 4 or 5 inches, just a little bit of extra fabric. I pull the yarn through, and I go 1 needle past my start position. The reason I do this is just so that I can overlap my waste yarn a little bit. It'll prevent me from getting a hole when I have those 2 different yarns joined together. I don't want to knot them because this one is just going to come out anyway. So I have 1 stitch that will be overlapped, and then I proceed to knit, I don't know, about 3 or 4 inches of waste yarn. Once I have about 3 inches of waste yarn, I then cut it . And now I will knit off my sock. I hold my sock from underneath with all of my weights so they don't go tumbling across the floor. And that's it. Our sock is now finished. Here's the toe. It's finished. You'll see right now there are no holes in the corner. And by knitting those last 2 needles together, I have a slightly rounded toe.